This is part 3, or lesson number 3 of the Secretary of Alchemy lesson series. Instead of exploring Aries, though, I'm right back to exploring Pisces high. Apparently, I'm still seeing things, so we're going to have to take another look at this particular tarot card, the Aeon. There are some important issues that come up when studying this tarot card for a little while. And I thought I was going to be able to get that particular lesson out of the way in less than an hour before, just one tarot card, right? And I could, knock it out and then get into the multiple card stacks with a series of lessons on each stack of cards. And so we're right back here again. But this is important information. In fact, I highly recommend watching lesson number 2 of the Secretary of Alchemy series of lessons in order to gain clarifying context on what I'm about to say. Some of it's going to come across as rather perplexing unless you go through that initial lesson. What I'm about to say is going to sound out of the blue if you don't have that context. And as though, I'm coming from just a completely oddball direction and interpreting this particular tarot card. So getting into what we're going to be discussing today, an important issue that comes up involves the word projection as it applies to solute perspectives maintained. This is important in civics in regards legal court proceedings and also the royal courts that have existed throughout human history, especially in Europe and Great Britain. But projection in that context, okay, can take statement form or presented statement form. It's basically can be a presentation, but a solute presentation is something that can be held in secret reserve. And that is important, especially as we witness how the U.S. legal system is evolving into what amounts to British intelligence tyranny and related communism unfolding in the United States. With a heavy influence coming out of communist China through corrupt politicians in the executive branch and also throughout the judiciary and the Department of Justice in the United States. Law enforcement in general having been compromised for decades in various different locations in the United States that are of prominence, like Southern California, Denver area, New York area, Washington, D.C., Dallas, Texas, since the early 60s. So we're talking about here is a statement of law as expressed in the imagery of this tarot card here. By projection, by statement of law, we're talking to a degree of natural law and of metaphysical law, scientific law, mathematical law, logic, logistics, everything that is important to intelligence agency, as it is essentially infiltrating its way into government in general. And that projection is symbolized in the card by the ghostly looking hermaphroditic figure that is projected forward from out of solute perspective. Now, this particular projection is not something that you are necessarily cognizant of. If you were, it automatically becomes a Sagittarius projection of manifest statement. And that is a different thing, but these statements are prepared pretty much the same way. It's just that if it's solute, it is held in reserve. So such a statement from out of the solute is similar to what is called an astral projection, okay, which is symbolized by this ghostly figure, this hermaphroditic figure. It demonstrates behavior relating to contemplation, which would be expected of anyone who would be, shall we say, consuming this projection at a disadvantage, because you would be consuming this statement late in the game compared with people who prepared it and held it in secret reserve for themselves. Courts do this sort of thing all the time. They keep secrets, and they prepare statements, and they prepare narratives, and they prepare controlled oppositions that can take this projected form, solute projection. If you ever actually see an astral body, it might alarm you to a great degree, like as though you're seeing a ghost. I've seen something like this one time under anxious circumstances, waking up in the morning, and that indicates, out-of-body presence, doing vampire work. They're right in your face when they're doing it, and you can't see clearly the features of the face that much to the point where you can recognize it, but you can see the outline. You can identify it as male or female, for example. And then you close your eyes again in a state of, shall we say, anxiety, and then open them again and it's gone. So that may sound like a hallucination or something, but no, you're seeing an astral projection. And so that analogy is used here. Okay, this individual further in the background that's dressed up like a hawk sitting in a throne in the card, that would then symbolize the judge deciding, when statements are to be issued to the public, what statements are to be held in secret reserve for court use, and which are to be issued forth, and when, and why. Okay, and it is understood that you've got a window of opportunity, once these statements are issued down in Sagittarius, to contemplate these projections that are coming at you, maybe in the news media or whatever. Okay, and you are doing so at a disadvantage. Okay, because time is short by then. Things are happening. People's lives are on the line, right? So this card presents a court form of ritual. Now, it could be a royal court where the seated figure in the imagery is a king or queen, but it's a king archetype that's placed there. The queen shows up as the canopy element of the Lady Starlight figure that seems to be forming a hairline. Okay, that's a court constituency symbol where you have court personnel there that are typically there on a day-to-day basis, and other people who visit in on the court. So that becomes the queen symbol, and the king is basically the judge. Whether it's a male or a female judge up there, it doesn't really matter. Or it's, literally a king sitting in royal court. Because the scary thing about, legal courts, the court system, even in the United States, is that it is an extension of royalty, of royal power. And the founders didn't do nearly enough to mitigate that problem. Okay, the courts are always very close to being abused and basically conducting war operations against people. And we are so dependent upon the quality of the population in resisting this process ever taking hold. And right now, the people are not successful in resisting. Okay, this is not merely just a small matter of, some elites gaining power and abusing power. That's just part of the equation. The other part of the equation is the population is not up to the task of maintaining its own freedom. Okay, they're not smart enough. Okay, we've been going home night after night and watching sitcoms for decades, watching spectator sports as though it's important, tracking the lives of celebrities as though that's important. And the end state of the people is not good. Okay? People of reduced intelligence are the kind of people that slide right into a tyrannous existence. Okay, it's the quality of the population that we are dependent upon here. Not radio talk show hosts. Okay? Not internet personalities. Not celebrities on television. Though they talk. That's really all it amounts to. The lessons are somewhat useful sometimes on a superficial level, but they never cut deep. So, in maintaining such a presentation or projection in secret, it is being maintained as solute. Pisces high is solute on an alchemical level. Thus, the statement is maintained in spiritual terms of spiritual zeitgeist, of solute perspective, of relative secrecy. Okay, this is like secret zeitgeist here, and it's likened to spiritual zeitgeist, the spirit of the age. Okay, and we're emphasizing spirit here, compared with the zeitgeist, the manifest zeitgeist of the age, which is obviously present all around us on a Sagittarius level, where the technological era is so obvious to us in our time, right? That's kind of a different kind of zeitgeist, though they interrelate quite a bit. In fact, part of that real zeitgeist, realistic zeitgeist, or manifest zeitgeist, would include statements and narratives issued from out of the legal court setting or the royal court setting. Okay, so these statements or projections are released to the public in realistic terms of zeitgeist, of precipitant perspective, that's Sagittarius, and in decisive timeliness, which means they are released as though conducting war, typically, against the populations. Okay, these are decisive releases of information. And timely, so, they're timed for just that kind of a purpose. They're maintained as an organically ever-prepared statement of fully appropriate terminology and medium for decisively timely released into precipitant manifestation. Okay, that means they are crystalline in your mind when you access the document on the internet and read it and are utterly horrified and are at a loss as to what to do. So you go looking for the news person to ease your emotions a little bit, make you feel a little more confident for a little while. And then you might go back to your regular daily routine of watching, human freedom vaporize into communist fire. Maintained as conceptual constructs of cultic orientation and either organic or static relative scope. Okay, by organic means that they are somehow living, which means they are changeable, they're mutable. And static relative scope, that means they are quote-unquote dead, or they do not change, they're just released and that's it. They may as well be film clips. They are also released as ultimately definitional terms of cultic paradigm orientation. Again, issuing in the precipitant perspective of Sagittarius, out of centralized Virgo perspective or judging perspective. Okay, so the judge or the king sits in pinnacle position on these matters, right? They are the masters of the situation. Controllers, if you will. Maintaining, for example, in the courtroom, effectively, lawyers are controlled opposition. Defense lawyers, prosecution lawyers effectively work together in the interest of the courts more than in the interest of the people. Okay, that means in the interest of the judge more than the jury. And I think that pretty much covers that issue. It's an introductory issue that's important. I'm looking at this card. I'm essentially looking at what amounts to a fire ritual taking place. It's almost volcanic looking, just like the moon, which literally symbolizes, amongst many other things, Vesuvius burying Pompeii. Okay. And there are precipitate elements buried in Pompeii to this day. Symbolize the earth element. Biological perspective is earthly. On a functional level, up here, though, it's a spiritual expression, fire ritual. This means solute ritual conducted in relative secret. It doesn't have to be secret. It might merely be private, in which case secrecy is not a goal associated with the proceedings. But very often with courts, secrecy is a goal. Secrecy is something you should be wary of. I at least recommend it anyway. But projection is important throughout this entire presentation. The concept of projection, which, on a more pointed level, can be construed as presentation. Some examples. You got Eliza Crowley and Lady Frida Harris essentially playing these roles here of king and queen, or judge and court constituency. So Eliza Crowley would be seated in the throne as the hawk-headed, far-seeing, and sharp as all get-out mind in control of everything here, or supposedly in control of everything. You would initially think anyway, or be inclined to think. And then Lady Frida Harris is the Lady Starlight thing here that forms the hairline of this anatomical presentation of a head. Okay. This network of court constituency has the ability to think like a higher being. Okay. In fact, both of these individuals are expressing certain perspectives on that issue of thinking. The kingly thing here and the queenly thing. And then also the projection is engaged in contemplation. And not from an advantaged perspective. Now, on top of, contemplation, there's also identification, which would be part of the expectancies associated with this issuance of statement of law or whatever. It is expected that you will identify to some degree with what is going on. You're expected to identify with it, in fact, in your contemplations. If you fall short of proper identification, you could find yourself before the court. So they're hoping for, expecting proper, or shall we say appropriate, quote-unquote, identification. This is the same kind of identification you run into with movie presentations or projections out of Hollywood. You could think of Hollywood as an expression of a court or a ritual proceeding. And they issue, projections that become crystallized in the public sphere in Sagittarius, but before that takes place, these things are effectively held in reserve in relative secrecy. Corporate secrecy or whatever, in the interest of business for one thing, but also in the interest of calculated impact on the public. The releasing of the art. So, in solitude terms, out of Hollywood, you're basically, people are viewing these films beforehand and evaluating them, judging them, you might say, and maybe making adjustments, maybe with panels of movie viewers coming through a theater to catch an advanced viewing. This is basically a quote-unquote ghost-in-your-face construction on the silver screen or in the form of something you access on the internet that was released by the government as quote-unquote law. Now, is it really law? The people should be able to know these things ahead of time. If the people are free, then only so much can be genuine and legitimate law, and the people would insist upon that. So we got Crowley, Eliza Crowley as king or judge in the partnership going on here, and shall we say projecting these tarot cards, these art productions, these constructions of a concept in symbolic form. And Lady Starlight here is also a canopy that effectively protects the judge or Eliza Crowley. This is important because the networks that, protect a judge or a king are also very powerful. In fact, you could argue that on a certain level they're more powerful than this king, who you could argue on certain levels is quite impotent. Depending on how things are working out, right? So, these are solute functional terms of proceedings taking place. Okay? They can be secret if they are designed to be secret. So these astral projections are only recognized in relative terms according to receptive perception and intelligence. So very often the deceptions associated with statements made depend upon linguistics made use of that the public might only have a limited understanding of. Okay, this has to do with the industry associated with the ritual or court proceeding. People who are educated as to the linguistics involved have an advantage. It's part of their advantage. Issuance must be contemplated towards relevant points of which there typically are many, implied or otherwise. This is of advantage to the issuers. Okay, so implied points. This is part of the contemplation issue here. All of these points, or most of them at the very least, have already been contemplated by the issuer of the projection. By the time it is crystallized for your consumption, the issuers have already contemplated everything. Okay, they understand the narrative thoroughly. They understand all the implications. And you have to figure these things out for yourself in your own time, which consists of a window of opportunity, because judgment is going to be issued at some point too, right? These are decisive actions, okay, that are taking place. Identification takes place through such issuances in revelatory terms. Example, oh my gosh. Showmanship is essential to a compulsory code. I guess that's what I wrote down there. Yeah, presentation. Okay. Presentation is everything when you're trying to promote identification. Okay. Identification is a powerful influence on people. Just like with Hollywood, you want them identifying with the protagonist. So they want you identifying with the judge, the prosecution, etc., etc. The government. And in order to do that, they have to present things a certain way. It has to do with what is known as public relations spin or propaganda, putting the best foot forward, at all times. And maybe keeping some information out of reach, comparatively speaking. That's one way to spin things. Other ways of spinning things involve operational spin, which gets into militant action quite a bit. This can take place, I guess, too, in this context. Literally, you're taking a form of operation that might be quite commonly experienced and kind of spinning it, twisting it just so that it fits a given situation that, they want to control. Want to establish a manipulative form of dominance up front, and then increasing levels of dominance through something like a justice system, and then they have control established. And identification falls right in line with control. When people are identifying the way you want them to identify, you have an easier time maintaining control over them. Okay, this is also, this court thing, this ritual thing is also a party thing. This is where you get parties of interested individuals together, people of like interest, we'll say. Quote unquote partying, okay. Parties of like interest together, okay. And here we got some movie symbolism, examples, the Brady Bunch movie. You got Greg as the seated kingly figure here. And you got Marsha as the Lady Starlight thing. She's really groovy and all that. And a king typically also has elements associated with both the Emperor up in Aries and the Chariot down in Cancer, or a prince. Cancer is one of the prince astrological signs. The Emperor is one of the knight or king signs. Fire element and earth element up in heaven, or associated with what you would call heaven. Just like Lucifer, according to some sources, is associated with heaven. Therefore, it's Aries, or pure darkness, the light bearer. Whereas Satan is supposedly associated with earth. Therefore, it is Capricorn as its appropriate place of categorization on an alchemical level. And it is more like, shall we say, a dangerous shadow. In comparison, I guess, archetype-wise, you get the Church of Satan. And you get the Temple of Set. Set I haven't figured out yet. I gotta look into that. Somehow Set is used in a more, shall we say, not quite as secret fashion as either Satan or Lucifer as a symbol. Pure dominance emulation. Okay, this is an important goal for this seated figure, this judge or king that is seated. This is the same archetype that is used in the movie Eyes Wide Shut, with that guy in gold and red that conducts court, ritual proceedings and sits in a throne. And he's got those two goons standing on either side of him that are kind of like a Lady Starlight presence. And then you've got the projection in the form of the drug-addicted model that's oh so, lovely and caring even, which is interesting. It makes her an interesting character, right, to contemplate. That is the same thing as this ghostly projection. Okay, they're using this Aeon trump card in that movie. Now, pure dominance emulation, since there is no such thing as pure dominance in nature, in reality, such an idea exists still as a metaphysics. And it is something that you have to emulate by indirect means. And one of the chief ways of doing that is with this Pisces high archetype here, with this seated figure, playing a purely dominant role of some kind. Could be public, could be secret. If it is secret, it is definitely solute, perspective, and highly manipulative, cunning. The actual manifest dominance tends to take the place of an obvious police state. And once you got the police state in place, this manipulation becomes 10 times more effective and devastating to people. And you have then control. Control is a Virgo thing. Judge sits in the Virgo seat as pinnacle in the court. King sits similarly in a royal court. Court or party conducts covert or solute prospective surveillance. Okay, the court, a legal court, a royal court, or secret ritual proceedings taking place, they have the ability to conduct surveillance on people to the degree that they've, developed the actual power to do this. It has a lot to do with intelligence networking. A powerful intelligence network allows you to, conduct surveillance on people, whether you have technology associated with that or not. Court or party maintains controlled opposition movements from covert or solute perspective against self and between relevant opposing parties. Okay, and this is where we get into where Lenin talked about you control your opposition, right? That's one way of doing it, maintaining a controlled opposition where you effectively control your own opposition. Another way of doing it is what I like to call bank perspective manipulations and control measures. The bank maintains the judgmental seat here, which is high centrist. It's central. Whether the judge is right wing or left wing matters less than that essential fact of being high in the situation and central, pinnacle. Okay, you set up controlled oppositions that operate effectively beneath your feet. It could be a lawyer, a defense lawyer versus prosecution lawyer, and prosecution team versus defense team. Effectively, that's becoming a controlled opposition. Okay, that's a really sad thing to take place. A defense team is supposed to be, defending the defendant to the best of their ability, but legally, in accordance with due process law, the Fifth Amendment, and what have you. And the opposition, the prosecution, is supposed to be doing the same, but only they're prosecuting with a careful eye on maintaining due process of law, right? Proper proceedings by the book all the way. You don't make a fiasco out of the court proceedings, inside or outside the court. If people make a fiasco of things, they do it outside the court, and they do it on their own terms, not the court's terms. The court conducts due process of law proceedings by the book. Very serious about these things. People's lives are on the line. You must be correct in your prosecution. Lawful. Genuinely lawful, right? And the same goes for defense counsel. The judge must be truly masterful in understanding constitutional law and due process. This includes a keen understanding of human rights. That's on top of understanding something like amendments to the U.S. Constitution and constitutional law otherwise. Methodology from out of solute or covert perspective is largely manipulative or Machiavellian. Police tyranny as overt bullying on the part of the quote-unquote justice system. Yeah, we're getting right back into intelligence manifesting nefarious influence in the form of Machiavellianism, which can be highly cunning in manipulating people. Again, setting up controlled oppositions, right? Getting people fighting each other, in what you perceive to be your best interests. You get Machiavellian judges on the bench there, and things get really nasty and secret proceedings that are conducted against the best interests of the people, etc., etc. Yes, as tyranny takes over, proceedings are increasingly deemed secret. These are secret proceedings, and we're not going to explain why. And the public does have a right to know. Okay, we need, transparency on the part of the government, of the people and by the people, in order for the people to maintain appropriate control over the government. The party or the court or the ritual is increasingly conspiratorial in function through controlled oppositions that are maintained. Okay. Yeah, conspiracy. Piracy kind of central to that terminology. Again, secret proceedings, right? It's not merely a matter of, private conversations. Okay, these are deemed secret. Okay, we're in confidence here. Our lives are on the line, or our livelihoods are at the very least, over this issue. The public is not to know, right? The process is less and less quote-unquote due in scope. Yeah, I think I've gone over that to a degree. The idea of a due process is less important all the time as tyranny takes hold through the court systems, whatever kind of court system we're talking about. Really, kings and queens can never be trusted. Okay, they are a compromise even in defending a nation against, foreign tyranny, encroachment. They're so easily infiltrated and taken control of by foreign interests. It's just like with the Biden family or the Clinton family. Okay, they're bought by foreign interests. Okay, they do not have the people's best interests at heart. They are getting rich. Just a huge grift. In fact, I consider royalty to be essentially organized criminal in nature. Even when it was initially, created in areas of the world defending themselves against, the militancy of foreign royalty, right? Trying to fight fire with fire, and then you just catch on fire in the process, right? Party or court maintains an effectively protected status for itself as prosecuting arm is a part of a larger justice system of policing scope. This is, again, police state, protecting police state. Justice system can kind of hide in there. Your judiciary can kind of hide in there and recede into the solitude background as it deems it necessary. And yeah, protected status, kind of receding into the background and letting the justice system just terrorize people. And if they won't look at evidence of any such thing happening, they won't take up a case in the interest of the people or the public. And then the tyranny-oriented people, dumb as rocks, will cheerlead that whole process right along. They'll scream to the top of their lungs, at the top of their lungs, "There is no evidence. Shut up, or we'll kill you." And that is happening. So, also the Starlight Canopy, the Starlight Lady up there playing the canopy role, as though, cross-referencing symbolically with the Chariot trump card. That's also kind of symbolic of the Great Pyramid of Giza as an issuance point for the Book of the Law by Eliza Crowley. Okay, that's all symbolism relating to this, the projection into the world of quote-unquote law, metaphysical law or whatever. He's basically introducing new zeitgeist. It's supposed to be out of the spiritual realms into the physical world, so he's covering the whole zeitgeist shebang, right? The spirit of the age, as you can actually see taking place around you. Things have been changing since the Golden Dawn, the heyday of the Golden Dawn, right? The Aeon, the Age of Aquarius. These are zeitgeist narratives, statements, or projections. Another example is Vampiros Lesbos as a movie of Byzantine scope. The party bed and room used to utter law, you might say, or just, contemplate in memory-related terms, right? Thinking back in time through history and incarnations or whatever, The woman in rock and roll looking Byzantine garb, kind of laying back on the make-out bed thing there with, Morphos, the assistant, dutifully watching nearby. That's kind of it fits in with this whole Great Pyramid of Giza thing where, in the Great Pyramid, the king or pharaoh or whatever would be lying in a coffin meditating, maybe astral projecting out of there with, some assistants very quietly nearby, such that they can observe the situation out of the corner of their eye for, movements, maybe dark movements or dark swirls or ghostly apparitions about the pharaoh. He kind of stands there like he's on guard or something. So these things do wind up in movies. Solute perspective maintained as a means of covert action affect. Designed secret court proceedings take place. Oh, designated secret court proceedings take place. Okay. Things are just kept, behind closed doors, and you don't ever find out what's going on with that. You can only hope that the court is maintaining itself in proper due process, right? Supremely conducted Machiavellianism, war and politics, which is what Machiavelli was all about. Machiavelli wrote The Prince and on the Art of War. You need intelligence enough to be able to operate effectively on that level. If you're a psychopath, for example, and you're not Machiavellian enough, typically you just wind up in prison. And you're not all that wonderful as you might think you are, right? Because of your narcissism getting out of control again. Perfect covert surveillance as a goal, right? If a court is watching you, it is doing so from a solute perspective, right? They're networked in your area as an intelligence network. That's pretty scary. Okay, it's not merely the grapevine at work. The grapevine only has so much ability to collect information on you would think. So courts do watch people. Okay, they're about to bring prosecutions, for example. The judges are networking to become involved with that, right? The prosecution teams are networking similarly. And maybe even the defense teams are brought into the mix to network as controlled opposition. Ritual practices and proceedings or solute perspective affect. Okay, court proceedings are kind of like rituals. You can call them like magic rituals, right? Because words have power along magical lines. If you're going to project a statement and then either hold it in solute terms or issue it in precipitant terms, okay, that's magic and power at work. These are ritual practices, okay, and there are people who are practitioners along these lines that are experts, compared with you who might be standing before a court. You might find yourself there one day. And we're dealing in, again, the impotence of opposition. Opposition either shallow in orientation or covertly colluding with the court or partying conspiracy, right? Okay, that's the Republican Party now. Okay, if you're a rhino, people should have figured out by now that a rhino is basically a Democrat that's associated with the military-industrial complex. It's no great mystery, all right? But, it took me for a while to wrap my head around that, simply because of my casual, everyday existence as, just a common citizen, right? You have to access the information to a degree on the internet to clue into it. But eventually you realize the symbolism even applies. Okay, a rhino's face is a version of a donkey's behind. And rear hooves that could like gore the crap out of you, right? That's not quite the same thing as an elephant. Elephants have long memory, right? That's something you associate with conservatism. So these cultic mascots all have meanings that are associated with designer-controlled opposition. And the Republican Party's finished. Okay, they're impotent. They're not going to get anything done. You can't rely on them any more than you can rely on the media to protect you. Okay, they're pretty much done. You either organize effectively in the interest of your own freedom, or it's over. Okay, your freedom's going to be snatched right out from under you. They are taking your freedom and your rights. It doesn't matter to them if your rights always exist or not, because they are effectively putting you in a position where you can't do anything more than talk, and then even then, talking could cost you your life. Okay, now we're getting to the psychology of solute projection. Solute psychology. Okay, came under cultic design. Okay. Much of this psychology applies on that level. Designer psychology, operant conditioning of people, classical conditioning of people, conducting public relations with people, projecting propaganda, effective propaganda, best foot forward stuff, you know. These people are believers, okay, because you can't sell a product unless you believe in it, right? And they know how to make themselves believers, and let me tell you, believers are dangerous people. They go to war, all right? They just go to war. So we have unconscious projection taking place here. Okay, unconscious projection. This would be associated with bias and quite often undue bias. There's a due bias and undue bias. As silly as that probably sounds. This is where you project your own inclinations on someone else as a scapegoat. And this is very often when it's unconscious, it's simply a defense mechanism. It keeps you as unaware as other people, I guess, except that other people typically are annoyed by it. So you're the one that's the most unaware in a situation like that. There's also unconscious identification. This is all designed into the program, just like unconscious projection, right? So where there's projection, there's also very often identification. And you're expected to identify. You approach, Logan 1 or whatever, Logan 5, you approach and identify, right? And it's expected of you. Things are manipulated so that you will identify. And if you don't identify right, like I said before, you could find yourself standing before the court. And you're going to go on a mystical journey. Logan. And the solution to this situation, this problem, okay, involves contemplation. Again, the projected image in the card, the tarot card, is involved in a form of contemplation. Okay, the signaling that's going on with the anatomical figure there of the ghostly hermaphrodite. It's involved in a kind of contemplation. And this is the kind of figure that anyone could find a way to identify with. That's why it's hermaphroditic. It's kind of an everything figure, right? It's designed to appeal on that level, I guess. And then you got a certain kind of priming of ideation that is also designed in, typically it's designed into these things, these projections. Every time you contemplate that projection, you are priming your mind relative to that situation that is unfolding before your eyes in crystalline terms and down there in Sagittarius land, in the situation that you encounter in life. Situation, of course, as a concept, is assigned Sagittarius, as is personality. So you are priming into manifestation, personality, situation, ideation. You're building a repertoire of all these things, right? And there's the other issue, which is very much associated with a living solute perspective, and that is ideas come to you as though out of the blue. This is where your mind is truly alive. Okay, you can have ideas. There is such a thing as conscience. Okay, your conscience might whisper in your ear, make you feel guilty. Count yourself lucky if you get signal guilt in your life, because at least you can feel it, and hopefully it isn't over anything too damaging. Because there's the whole issue of making repairs relative to anything that you would feel guilty about, right? But signal guilt is not the end of the world. Other forms of rumination associated with guilt can be, because it can bring you right into a suicidal state over time. But signal guilt is something to value, same as signal anxiety. Now, the signal aspect is a Freudian terminology that he came up with. Signal anxiety, signal guilt, signal emotion. If you can experience a full range of emotional repertoire in your life, you're well off, comparatively speaking. Some people are blunted in their ability to, example, experience guilt of any kind. A psychopath, for example, has problems on that level. And I don't think it's because, well, there's a lack of signaling emotion. It's the lack of ability to perceive it. Your brain even might not have the equipment for it. Okay, like in the case of many psychopaths. Brain changes have taken place, maybe, or they were just born that way. And brain changes need to take place for them to pick up proper signal. Signal guilt, signal anxiety. Those are two issues that plague, due to a lack thereof, the psychopath. And they, for whatever reason, can't pick up the signal and perceive it and feel it. Okay, these things help you to, for example, experience compassion and empathy. Empathy, the basis of developing compassion. If you have empathy, you can be compassionate. But you would have to experience the signal of anxiety and guilt. These are things to be valued. Popular media presentation in private prior to distribution or during distribution. I discussed that already. Party in court, projection, judgment, discussed those issues. Media responses prepared. Oh, media responses are interesting. That's part of the process. You know, you prepare things ahead of time and you make sure you have upfront understanding before you issue those statements, right? The public has to scramble. They've got a window of opportunity for understanding these things. Now we get into the psychology, which is something I have to look into more. It's associated with such issues as fragmentation of the psyche, which you can associate with something like schizophrenia, but it doesn't have to be associated with schizophrenia. It does tend to be associated with dissociation, or just, how your conscious perception dissociates itself from perceiving present reality in favor of, say, flight to fantasy or escape into fantasy of one kind or another. And this is where television culture comes into play too. People escape into the television, like Lynette Fromm escaped into the television rather than becoming an academic. Look what happened with that situation. Once it, winds up under manipulative control on cultic terms, compulsory cultic terms, destructive cultic terms. So an example of fragmentation, symbolism showing up regarding, shall we say, partying would be JSK being raped by Wojtek Frykowski. He died by having, not only being shot and stabbed, but having the back of his skull bashed in by 13 blows with, the butt of a .22 caliber pistol that itself fragmented in the process as a kind of an orgasm symbol. It symbolizes a rape that took place. The infant JSK was raped, which they might have been assuming that there would be fragmentation of the psyche involved with that. And this is important here because fragments along these lines become solute and are forgotten. Okay, they dissociate. And this is where you get into dissociative identity disorder issues, which are, for JSK, you're talking about somebody with a very stable personality. So he doesn't manifest the symptomatology of DID, although they consider him to be suffering fragmentation of the psyche on that level. You could argue that personalities have gone spinning off into outer space. The inner space you might think of as the darkness within solute perspective. And there are other forms of dissociation, including that which actually JSK manifested in life, and that is simply becoming rather entranced at times and escaping into fantasy play, which is something he practiced for like 3 years as an infant. So it's a part of his life for the rest of his life, right? And he dissociates that way, becomes numb to the world, and is off by himself, where he's safe and stable, right? You could argue this is a form of anti-priming, or the opposite of priming. Somehow you're not keeping things accessible, like with priming. Okay, things are becoming less accessible for stability of personality's sake or whatever. They're maintained that way. You become amnesic and you forget. You forget events that took place. This is very easy for an infant to do because an infant is a rather delicate creature on a personality level, right? Things will cause them to dissociate. And if you're wise, you're ever watchful for the possibility of such a thing taking place, right? Traumas, falling off a bed, for example. You don't know what could happen with something like that. Brain damage, for one thing, but also fragmentation of personality associated with dissociation due to the experience of trauma. Maybe also there's a stab in the back associated with falling off the bed and hitting your head on the floor. Maybe your mother was literally hoping you'd die from it. That becomes a part of that unconscious mixture of ideation taking place associated with this solute perspective mechanism of dissociating and fragmenting of personality, memory, experience. And then there's the cult. I wrote something down here: compulsory cultic acts, or gosh darn it, I hate it when I get sloppy here near towards the end. Okay, you're trying to maintain a public relations. That's a projection. Okay, typically a very maintained exactly the way a court of law would maintain it. You can think of a court of law that's gone, corrupt, or a royal court as a cultic situation of compulsory dimension at the very least, if not outright destructive or obviously destructive. Anything compulsory is really at least potentially destructive. Some things need to be compulsory, like, it's against the law to murder people. Well, obviously. People are enthusiastic about protecting themselves from murder, so you could argue that even that perspective is cultic as a result of people, sharing enthusiasm on that subject and maintaining a court system in the interest of keeping people from being murdered, right? And prosecuting people who decide they're going to murder other people. Legally prosecuting them in such a fashion as not to threaten the entire public with tyranny. So public relations and related propaganda are maintained, and this can be very effective because these people do their homework. They're motivated to do so either out of dependency or profit motivation. Associated with this is always the belief system. Now, as we watch tyranny take over through the court systems and the various forms of partying going on, right? There's belief systems associated with that. And compulsory belief systems, especially corrupt ones associated with organized crime and destructive cultism, they tend to involve what you might call disinformation. That's a mix of information that's put together. Some truthful elements are always present as a means of hooking people into the belief system, keeping them enthusiastic, right? And this initial draw is eventually replaced by various forms of amplified ecstatic activities, actions taking place. Sex cultism, for example, as a means of keeping people hooked into the cult, right? Making it so you can swing them into an entranced state of relative rapture, right? And then you start swinging them in the opposite direction at other times into group punishment activities. This keeps people from thinking clearly, right? They're drawn into the cult, but they're developing a love-hate relationship with the cult at the same time, right? And they will tend to focus their minds on that level unproductively. I think that covers everything. I think I covered it pretty well. As I said, started seeing things again, needed to go back and look at this tarot card one more time and cover some important issues that come up when studying something like this. Okay, these tarot cards are no joke. They're worthy studies. If you want to study tyranny, if you want to study nature, metaphysics, it's all in there. It's symbolism. It's open to interpretation. I have a tendency to be very optimistic with my interpretations, or at other times, though, cynical, maybe unduly cynical at times. So, thank you for listening. Lesson 4. Hopefully I'll be able to get into the Aries stack of cards.